Transfer portal news, Alabama recruiting, and Bryce Underwood, all here on The Portal.
Locked On presents The Portal, the daily podcast covering college football recruiting and everything NIL. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back to The Portal Podcast, where you get your daily recruiting, NIL, and transfer portal news. I'm your host, Brian Smith, longtime college football writer and recruiting analyst. Thank you for making The Portal Podcast your first listen each and every day. Truly appreciate you stopping in to get all the latest college football happenings. And today, the transfer portal has exploded. One of the best, if not the best player that will be in the portal this spring is also going to be an offensive tackle. That is a premium position. We're going to talk about that extensively. Then we're going to move on and talk about the University of Alabama. They've started slow in recruiting. Will the tide rise up, and how soon? We're going to break that down. And then finally, Bryce Underwood, the number one recruit from the class of 2025 for many recruiting services. The quarterback signs with the Michigan Wolverines. How much of an impact will Bryce have for wide receivers and other skill players to get them to come to Ann Arbor, because Michigan is more of a run-first offense? To help me figure all of that out, Mr. John Garcia Jr. from Rivals.com. John, how you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. First off, when I saw Xavier Hill in the portal, former LSU player, transferred to Memphis, played several years, I was like, oh. Then I dug in. I didn't realize how versatile he was. You and I talked about that off air. He's played guard, right tackle, left tackle. He had 1,756 snaps over the course of the last two seasons. And at in my opinion, the rarest position to find quality and somebody that's got proven ability to stay on the field, not be injured, in the portal. Nobody that's a great tackle ever gets in the portal this early. Like, when I saw that, I was shocked. My prediction is that he sets the NIL trend, and whether or not other offensive tackles jump in. What do you say about him, and why do you think people should pay attention to what he does?
Well, I think some of the key points that you brought up, right? You can't speak for experience. Obviously, size is God-given. All of those things speak for themselves. But the experience and versatility, I mean, those are two elements that your typical portal lineman in particular doesn't have, right? You see almost one or the other. It's a smaller school left tackle who's been, at Harvard for 2 or 3 years, and boom, he pops up, and you just love that experience, but not necessarily the versatility or the one-to-one, experience against great competition. I think here you get great reps, even dating back to his LSU days when he started a couple of games 2-3 years ago. Then you factor that in with the immense experience at Memphis, which we all understand is a legitimate group of 5 program. One of the 2 or 3 that come to mind every year when you talk about a playoff potential, program, they come to mind. So you're talking about an offense that, does a lot and has been known to chuck it, so not only is it experience and versatility, but it is in a modern, fast-paced offense. So, I think all of those elements combine extremely well for Hill, and you'd have to imagine a potential bounce back to SEC country looks good here, right? This is a Memphis kid. We know Ole Miss was in there. This is a Mississippi All-American type player coming out of high school. Where will the Rebels stand? I mean, could this be an LSU, bounce back? They obviously had transition, not too far removed from when he first got there. How does that look, potentially? So I'm very curious to see, where geographically schools start to come in, and obviously at a premium position with that versatility, NIL is going to be maybe the primary factor, because, he was at Memphis where he's from. This was something that worked for him. He was an all-conference player last year. So to remove yourself from that comfort, from that theoretical ease where you're going to be a guy who's preseason all AAC, you're going to start getting some NFL draft buzz a year out. He could have had all of that at Memphis. So to leave, to depart, or at least think about departing, that NIL number is getting, at least in principle, pretty high.
I agree, and I think that he'll get over $1 million is my guess. I don't know exactly what the number will be. It could, depending on who gets involved, like if Oregon gets involved, et cetera, it could really change. But I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Michigan or Ohio State or Texas or anybody got involved because, again, he can plug and play at guard or tackle. That is the rarest of the rare. And for the measurable sake, he's listed at around 320 pounds. Size will not be a determining factor against him. And he's played, again, both tackle and guard. So no matter your scheme, he's going to be able to figure it out. Last point on Xavier Hill, him getting in early. I'm just curious on your take on this. Do you think he knows where he wants to go, or he just put himself in and let's just see what happens?
Yeah, I think this close to the actual spring games at some of these programs, and obviously the window opening up on April 16th, I do tend to agree that it probably means he knows where he's headed. Again, this is an SEC pedigree kid coming out of high school who proved it at the group of 5 level thereafter. So typically a player with so much value and experience, like we keep talking about, those destinations are somewhat predetermined. I don't know if he's got the do not contact tag, but regardless, through back channels and the operations that we understand are working 24 hours a day at this point, in the college football realm, you'd probably be safe to guess that he's got at least an idea of where he wants to go. But that doesn't mean it's done. Once that window opens, all it takes is one phone call, one potential promise to at least pivot to a degree, take one more visit, be a little bit more diligent in the process. And obviously, as we know in recruiting at any stage, one visit, one new call can change, any part of the process, including the final decision. But I tend to think a guy like that, 5th-year guy, a ton of experience, some legitimate buzz. He's got the accolades. Growing up in SEC country, you just would expect a guy like that to have his ducks in a row, behind the scenes.
Yeah, I agree with that. And to that point, most of the elite guys, they probably have an idea going into the portal, but you never know. Maybe he is open to, at least, as you said, taking some overtures from it. But again, my prediction is he kind of sets the trend. If he does well and it pops off and these guys talk to each other, his NIL numbers good. You might see a few more guys get in the portal because of what Xavier gets. That's something else to think about. I mean, as you noted, John, if a kid's comfortable at a school, why leave? I mean, he's from the area, like where he went to high school was 20 minutes from downtown Memphis. So it's not very far. You're not going to remove yourself from that before you go to the draft unless you have a good idea. You're going to make a lot of money. That's just my opinion. Next up, a kid that this is just how it always seems to work for them. Oklahoma State. I just wanted to throw this out there in general. They pick up a commitment from a running back that's under the radar. How many times have we said that about Oklahoma State just in general? But running back,
Gordon, Chuba Hubbard, you can go down the list.
Yeah, so his name's Freddie Brock. He played at the G5 level. He's a kid that's transferred into Oklahoma State. His numbers are just okay, but the one thing about Gundy's offenses, I find this is interesting. He always finds a way to maximize his skill guys. If they're good at the screen game, he'll get them the ball. If they're good at running outside, he'll get them the ball, whatever it is. This kid last year had 795 yards, 5.4 and 8 touchdowns. Oklahoma State was abysmal last year. So nobody's going to pick them very much. Right now, I'm not a gambling man, but I would bet they end up in the top 4 of the Big 12 this year just because they're not supposed to. They're always that team. And this is the kind of player. When Ollie Gordon broke out, nobody had any idea who that guy was. It's just hilarious how they find those guys. Why is it certain programs are so good at just identifying talent like Oak State? What is that?
I think you have to be self-aware. I think, everybody wants the 5-star guy or the number 1 portal guy. All that stuff is great. And you certainly, if you shoot your shot and you feel good about it, you try to a degree, but knowing when to pull back, knowing when to pivot, knowing when to go deeper on your board at any position is always been the key for those sort of tier 2 programs or programs we view beyond the blue bloods that always kind of find themselves in the mix anyway. That is really the formula. Obviously, you've got to focus on development and hit on some of the guys you're taking a little bit more risk with recruiting. But, for an Oklahoma State, look, you're always second fiddle in your own state, and you've got to go into the Lone Star State for the most part to go and win recruiting battles against the entire country. So if you've embraced that and you live that life, you're early in on some of these recruits and you're able to build, longer lasting relationships, but the stability there. And like you said, the ability to be known as a program that maximizes talent I think those factors can go a long way. You get the kid with the chip on his shoulder, and oftentimes that can really work out, from a production basis, from a loyalty basis as well. So I think it works the same way in the transfer portal. You're going to offer opportunity earlier than some of these other programs, and at certain positions, certainly running back in particular, you've got the resume to stack up against some of these other programs that are maybe bigger and badder than yours. So that formula and that awareness to fight in that second tier as opposed to wasting resources in that top tier, I think that is what stability has become in college football. And you mentioned the Big 12. Look, I mean, it's like the NFC South at the NFL level. Like it's worst to first all the time, right? Look what Arizona State just did. I mean, it's a perfect example. They used the portal, they went modern, they grabbed some underdogs. I mean, who's got a bigger chip on their shoulder than Scatterboo, right? So that formula works, and we know the Big 12 is a conference that's going to just live through transition. What does Colorado look like? How can Arizona State maintain? I mean, there are questions at the very top of this thing that often lead to those big, fluctuating records from one year to the next. So why would we expect anything less?
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at too. And Georgia State to Oklahoma State, this is the kind of the fit that you're talking about. They find guys wherever. And again, he had 8 touchdowns, over 5 yards a carry last year at Georgia State. I would not be surprised at all if Freddie Brock ended up being a guy that is talked about a lot next year. It's just what Oklahoma State does. When we come back, we're going to talk all things Alabama Crimson Tide recruiting. Are they about to pop off? That is next here on the Portal Podcast. Get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades, Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400-plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. If you need help with an order, Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free TradeMaster program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already using it. The advantage of take care of it now. Now it is your turn. Join the TradeMaster program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That is supplyhouse.com. John, the Alabama Crimson Tide have 4 commitments. Now, you and I are big fans of one guy in particular. We'll talk about that in a moment. But just as a reminder for those that either love Alabama or hate Alabama, and you're probably in one of the 2 categories, there's usually not much in between. Bama has always seemingly started slow, even under Saban, because he went after big fish. And as you know, the big fish usually swim a little longer before they find their home. Do you think Alabama fans should be a little concerned about DeBoer's recruitment of these players? And they're very national again this year. That's something else we'll talk about momentarily. Or is this par for the course, no reason for concern for Bama?
Yeah, I think this is probably par for the course, at least right now. I mean, the timing of this conversation is really good because the spring football game's coming up on Saturday. So A-Day is going to be big. It's going to have, a ridiculous visitor list. I've already seen some of the names. They're hot and heavy. And I think, simultaneously, Bama's doing this thing where obviously you got to win in state. I think Auburn's had that recruiting momentum since even before DeBoer took over. Hugh Freeze and company have done a great job local and semi-local, but we knew the moment Kalen DeBoer got the Bama job, this would be a little bit more of a national reach for Alabama, particularly on the West Coast. And we've seen that success every single cycle. We've seen it through the transfer portal as well, and not with just his Washington guys. He's brought in players, from USC and some of these other programs. So I think that combination bodes well for this time of year. And again, we can't ignore the portal. I think that window opening here in just about a week or so, it has everything to do with it. That portal market will ripple into the high school recruiting market like it always does, because yeah, there are expected guys to jump in, backups, guys who were injured, homesick, et cetera, the classic excuses. But we just talked about an Xavier Hill, starters, big names jumping in the portal. That can reset the entire recruiting board on both fronts, and there could be more of that on the way here in the next week or so, especially with some of these programs canceling or going private with their spring games, to protect maybe some of these backups and earn young guys who are high ceiling players. So I think all of that could factor in, with Alabama recruiting. You always expect them to bounce back. The power of that script A, I do think still resonates. And in state, they've got to make a climb. They've got to counter what Auburn has done. I think with this 26th class in particular, the Tigers got in so early on some of the bigger name guys within state lines, your Jermichael Garrett's of the world, your Shadarius Toodles of the world, et cetera. So Hezekiah Harris, they got early pledges from these recruits. So the remaining big names, Xavier Crowell, Sedarian Morgan, certainly, maybe the number one player in the state, those players, Tank Jones, they've got to bounce back and win recruiting battles with. So I do think Bama's going to be in position to win the majority of those. I think they probably still lead for Crowell despite that reclassification. And Tank Jones has always sort of been viewed as an Iron Bowl battle. Auburn had early momentum. I think Bama has seized it in the last 6 months or so. So as long as some of those go through, I do think it'll be really positive for Bama from spring season to official visit season in the month of June, where we typically see every program step up a little bit on the recruiting trail. It would be, hard pressed and surprising if Alabama wasn't one of those with double digit commitments by the time we do get closer to kickoff.
Are you going to be surprised if they don't get, let's say, a week from now, if they haven't picked up at least a couple commitments after their spring, whatever they're calling, everybody's hiding their spring games, but whatever it is, if they don't get 2 or 3, would that make you at least think about it?
I'd be surprised because you've got a combination of things that should always work to Alabama's favor, right? First of all, from a national standpoint, everyone's going to be tuned in. This is a huge quarterback battle, right? Ty Simpson, Austin Mack, who came over with DeBoer from Washington, and then Keelan Russell, number one player in the country for us at Rivals last year. This thing is somewhat open. There's been no starter named. We don't know how DeBoer is going to handle it this time around because he's not inheriting a starter like he did with Jalen Milroe this time last year. So I do think that decision, probably a little bit more paramount in his office than recruiting, at least at the moment. But that always comes to a heed on the spring game, telecast or what have you. So I think the national attention that Alabama gets can sometimes filter into recruiting. Hey, it's on ESPN and all these people are watching and talking about it. That sometimes can push you towards, inching closer to that decision. But you're going to have a bunch of top level recruits on campus. And now you've got an official visit window that you could take advantage of. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but we saw North Carolina spend some official visit resources last weekend in the month of April. We know other programs are going to do it. So with that window earlier, and more onus is put on the programs themselves, you would expect those with the most resources to take advantage, and Bama's still certainly in that conversation.
Yeah, Bama is a very unique scenario because they're one of the few brands that with one visit can completely change the future of a recruitment. They've got the facilities, obviously the championships, the head coaching pedigree, etc. I've just been curious, as of you, how much are they going to pivot towards the in-state play? Because Auburn, whether you want to say it was, I don't know, but Auburn won the state last year handily. How much was that Bama allowing it? How much was it their coaching staff adapting to be in the South? I still have questions about whether they're going to win, especially trench warfare in the South for recruiting has always been the end-all be-all. I want, like Anthony Jones to me is the most important recruitment in the state. They've got to do better in the trenches, in my opinion. I don't know what you think, John, but that's important. And then just recruiting Atlanta better, maybe getting another kid from Florida that's a D lineman, whatever it may be. They need to do that if they're going to be consistent year in and year out. I know they're going to steal a California kid or two that even Saban probably wouldn't have because their contacts are so good out there. But you got to get the guys down south, the linemen in particular. And you can't allow Auburn just to run away with the state either. That's your rival. So I'm curious how this goes. The next week for Alabama is going to be fascinating. I absolutely agree with that 100%. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about Bryce Underwood, Michigan. How much impact does he have on their recruiting? That is next here on the Portal Podcast. There aren't many guys built like Bryce Underwood. Like, I remember the first time I saw him 2 years ago at Battle Miami, I walked up by him and I'm like, that's what it's supposed to look like right there.
Yeah.
And he started throwing the football around, and I'm talking to him a little bit. Nice guy, A to B. Personality-wise, he reminded me a little bit of Jeremiah Smith. He just does his business, doesn't worry about what else is going on. I'm here to get it done. That's the right attitude, by the way. Do you think that with his incredible arm talent, and he's just a freak out, like he could play free safety at a college if he wanted to athletically, do you think it would change Michigan recruiting specifically at the wide receiver spot? Even though the visits happen before this next season and they see, okay, how much is Bryce or whoever's playing quarterback really throws it around? Do you think that makes a difference or no?
I think it has to. If you're talking about how, Coach Moore is going to not survive, because obviously it's still incredibly early and they're 2 years removed from a national title. However, he's going to create an identity, with his mark at Michigan, whether it's Jim Harbaugh 2.0 or Harbaugh with a tweak, whatever it is, they've gone all in on Bryce Underwood. So it has to change through him. Let's go back to when Bryce committed. Not only did you see a decommitment from, the other quarterback that was on board, in 2025, the 26th guy decommitted, Brady Hart, and reclassified and ended up at Texas A&M. So that ripple effect, when you get that big fish, the biggest of fish in a sense, and the biggest in-state win for the Wolverines in 3, 4, 5 recruiting cycles, when you get that guy at that position, you're all in, and we've seen all the, financial numbers and NIL and all of that. Of course, that played a huge part. But when your resources are quite literally dug into one guy, it's got to change through him. So, comparing him to the last 5-star type guy they brought in at QB and JJ McCarthy, it's such an opposite scenario. JJ got to take his time. And let's be honest, when that national title year popped up, JJ didn't have to do a lot on his shoulders. They were unbelievable in the trenches, had maybe the best running game and 1-2 punch in the country. So many elements to ease him into it. And then when you did need something from him, he obviously delivered, and he ended up being a top 10 pick as a result. I think it's going to be the opposite with Underwood. Everybody knows this roster's built to be run first. So we saw teams figure that out very quickly last year and really attack, that point, knowing QB was a weakness. So if he's got to be the guy to buck that trend, it's got to be with his arm and his legs. I'm glad you brought up the athleticism, because when you ease a quarterback into it, his best friend is not only the running game and the offensive line, but his own athletic ability. I do think that's going to be paramount in him finding ways to make plays. You go back a couple years to Caleb Williams sort of seizing that job at Oklahoma. Yeah, his viral plays were scramble and throw the thing, but it's that scrambling ability, that comfort, that instinctual improvisation that made all of that happen. And obviously, Heisman Trophy, #1 pick, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that really allows a mobile quarterback to transition just a little bit cleaner than maybe a pocket guy. Look at Cedric Bailey at NC State, a guy who wasn't as heralded as any of these guys, assimilates quickly because, yeah, he's got the arm, he's got the experience, all of those things, but his mobility really allowed him to make plays, on the front end of his first few starts. So I think if that's the case at Michigan, this is the perfect type of player to start to galvanize in the right direction. And I don't think it's going to be a numbers thing, a statistical thing. Michigan's not going to be top, let's say 20 in the nation in passing next year. But if Underwood shows those flashes, whether it's the mobility, the off script, just the pure playmaking ability, because we know physically the arm talent, all of that is there, I do think that opens the door a ton for recruiting. Because before this year, it was about selling the idea of playing with him, and that helped. Look, Michigan went on a tear at the end of the 25 cycle because they flipped Bryce and so on and so forth. Yes, but it's a whole different ball game when people see it, when people know, hey, yeah, it's only September, October, but this kid's making this offense better and making Michigan exciting from an offensive standpoint perceptionally. that is where I think you could see a real explosion with the positions that matter relative to QB. You're talking left tackle, wide receiver, even running back. That can all become a bigger part of the Bryce Underwood effect up at Michigan. I think, Caleb Williams was a great example. Arch Manning is probably the best example of that as well. You saw a buzz the moment he committed and other guys jumped in. But I think now that he's actually doing it, I think there's an opportunity for Texas wide receiver recruiting to even level up one more notch than it already has this fall. So I do think Michigan has to have Underwood at least flash enough in 2025 to where recruits start to take that in and run with it relative to Michigan on their list, because it's just one of those positions, that playmaking wide receiver position, even tight end to a degree. It's just a position that hasn't been fruitful to the Wolverines in terms of, comparing to the rest of those blue bloods down the road at Ohio State, certainly Texas, we just mentioned, even your Alabamas of the world, even your Penn States of the world might have been more explosive and exciting at wide receiver. And that's saying a lot relative to what we saw last year.
I agree wholeheartedly. And I also think that Bryce is going to be a guy that knows, if I'm going to get a ring while I'm in Ann Arbor, I got to get at least one guy that's just 3rd and 8. Hey, they covered us. They did their job, and I can still throw it to this individual, and he's going to make the play. They've got that guy in spades in Columbus. If you gave Bryce what they have in Columbus, I would be, holy cow. But they don't have anything like that. So I think this year, if they don't sign at least one elite receiver and or get one out of this spring, like the portal window coming up.
I was going to say.
There it is.
Window.
You and I talked about that off air. Like April 16th to the 25th, guys can officially jump in. But if Michigan does not get a portal guy, and I talked about this, I did a preview of Michigan the other day here on the Portal Podcast, they can win 10 games this year. But they got to get a guy out of the portal, probably on both sides, just to bolster. And they didn't want him to be a receiver, just to add. I mean, they got Samaj Morgan and some other guys that are good, but they don't have a number one. If you give that room an incredibly talented receiver, they got running backs. Their O-line's still going to be good. They brought in a transfer quarterback and Mikey Keene, who can at least help bridge the gap until Bryce is ready or be there if he's injured for any time. You got to get a receiver. So with that, there's one thing that I wanted to talk about before we wrap up here on the Portal Podcast. You and I talked about off air measurables. I don't think everybody truly understands why it's a value, how coaches look at it, why it's different for like a defense that runs a true 3-4 compared to a 4-3. Explain to people what measurables are. And if you want, John, throw it into why it matters in recruiting rankings at Rivals.com.
Well, look, I mean, everything is a reflection of the NFL draft for us at Rivals, right? And you look at the colleges, it's kind of the same deal. And then you start to factor in, hey, nobody's really got the time to develop anymore, right? How many hot seat guys do we see, going
Yes.
heavy in the portal because they know, that the clock is ticking, right? So we're not grabbing, young feisty players with a lot of body transformation to go, at the next level. Those guys aren't getting, signed as much as they used to because of the portal, because of that shorter window that all of these colleges have, and because of the NFL. Let's be honest, if you're a mediocre program, but you're sending guys to the league, let's look at, a tier 2, like a Missouri, for instance, that has turned out, receivers, defensive linemen, my goodness, in the NFL. I mean, that perception can carry some weight and really, maintain, some stability when it comes to a down year on the field, right? That reputation, Oklahoma State, we talked about earlier, that can help you, hold on to the gig TBD for a while, right? TBD. And every coach will tell you, this is the thing. If you're going to miss on a guy, A versus B, very similar qualities, but one guy's just a little bit longer, a little bit more versatile, has tested better. Every coach will tell you in this day and age, especially if you're going to miss on the measurables. It's just one of those recruiting cliches, like track the visits. If you want to know where a kid might be leaning in his commitment decision, it's the same thing on the scouting side. Miss on the measurables. So yeah, a Bryce Underwood who's 6'4", 220 pounds, who can run it, who could throw it, who looks polished, who looks experienced, who has all this stuff to his name. You're going to bank on that guy more than, the 5'11", 6-foot quarterback who might be a little bit more accurate, might have better statistics, might have better footwork, and even a higher floor as a freshman, you rather miss on the other guy. And I know that's an extreme example, but that is something that we will always see in this process. And the NFL draft coming up will reflect that, right? I mean, Shamar Stewart, everyone knows 4.5 sacks, throughout his collegiate career at A&M. But I mean, the most measurably gifted guy, maybe in the entire draft, destroyed the combine, destroyed the pro day. I mean, just has everything you want from a modern defensive lineman. It's probably going to push him into the first round. So it's whether you're a purist or not, you might look at it as, man, that's not right, but that's the game. That's the business element of the sport. So if NFL teams are going to miss, they will miss on the measurables, and we have to reflect that on our end. But there are ways to circumvent that, right? I mean, whether you're too big for a certain position, like a Derrick Henry, where everyone, including Georgia at the time when he was committed, said, hey, you got to be a defensive player. You got to be near the box. You got to be near the line of scrimmage. You can circumvent that if you are so dominant at your preferred position that you sort of force people's hand. And obviously, Derrick is I think still the all-time leading high school, rusher in United States history. And Alabama gave him that chance and said, hey, okay, come in as a running back. We'll see if it works out. If not, we'll move you. But, people forget he was committed to Georgia until they started talking about defense with him. So he ends up at Alabama and, Heisman Trophy, et cetera. The rest is history, ahead of a Hall of Fame NFL career. So you can circumvent the measurables, whether you're too big or too small relative to the norm, if you are dominant. And we do still see that popping up in recruiting. I wrote a story this morning about DeAnthony Lafayette out of Orlando, 6'1", 230, edge rusher. You're not going to, drop your phone and go Google him when you hear those measurables. But if you are consistently dominant at a premium position, which, pass rushing is, 17.5 sacks last year and a dominant run this offseason on the camp circuit, that can circumvent the height and weight requirement that some of these programs have. And that has led to an SEC breakthrough for DeAnthony just in the last week. Vanderbilt last week, LSU on Monday. So now all of a sudden this is an SEC prospect without quote unquote SEC measurable. So you can circumvent it, but you've got to be special and ultra productive in the process. And I think those are good lessons for this time of year, whether you're watching spring football games, the NFL draft, or certainly our latest rankings update.
John, tell everybody where they can find your work, my friend.
Real simple, rivals.com.
Rivals.com it is for him. You can find everything we do here on the Portal Podcast, whether it's Odyssey, Spotify, Apple, YouTube. You can get us at all those places. Make sure you like and subscribe. This has been the Portal Podcast. We will see you again soon.